Okay.
Alrighty, it is my great pleasure to introduce my old pal RU Sirius on Esoteric Beat. Welcome, RU.
Hey, hi Ted. How are you doing?
Doing great. Really glad to have you
All
here.
right.
It's been 3 years since we last talked on video.
Okay. Has it been
And
that long? Oh my God. I
so
tried
you,
to go back to that house recently, but the woman who let us in has passed away, and I guess her husband was in mourning, so we couldn't get up there.
ah,
I wanted to show the Mondo house to my co-author Shira Chess, but there was no luck as far as that went.
that's a bummer. That was such a fun interview. I just reviewed it, and there's definitely a few things I'll want you to get your take on
All right.
updated. So first of all, tell us about the new book.
Okay. Well, I mean, you read a version of it, um, and now it's going to be something pretty new with Shara coming in to collaborate, cannibalizing what I've already written, including, I think, some of the stuff from an even earlier thing called Use Your Hallucinations, which I think I shared with you at some point, which got way too deep into the weeds of the High Frontiers reality hackers years, and I kind of lost my gas when I tried to get to Mondo 2000 because I just didn't have the memory of detail for the Mondo years that I had for those earlier years. But yeah, it should be really interesting. An interesting collaboration with Ashera, who has written about gaming culture and has just completed or almost completed a book about the occult and the internet, the influences of occult uh, on early internet culture and mid-year 1990s internet culture. So yeah, that's what's up. It's still called Freaks in the Machine, Mondo 2000 in late 20th century tech culture, and coming to a store near you probably in 2026. I mean, the time lags in books as compared to what people are able to communicate instantaneously is can be distressing, but as they say, it is what it is, and books are their own very cool thing. So
Well,
yeah, I'm pretty excited about it.
we're very excited you landed a contract. You want to tell me about what Shira Chess brings to the table? Now, I'm excited about her work, and I understand she's done some work on play and resistance, which is gonna condition some of the questions I have for you.
Yeah, okay. Well, she is decidedly a feminist writer, which should create an interesting dynamic between us. Uh, but yeah, so she definitely promises to excise the cringe from my own content. Um, but hopefully, some of the irreverence will remain. I'm sure a lot of the irreverence will remain. She brings a fresh perspective to all of it. I mean, she comes in as somebody who really wasn't there in the 90s, wasn't a Mondo fan back in the day, but has become interested and one could say obsessed as she has been required to really dive into it with Mondo and its culture. And she gets out there and she's kind of re-interviewing people as well as interviewing people who were disinclined to do interviews previously, particularly Queen Mu, who approved of the project early on but refused to be interviewed. And although she hasn't specifically gone on the record as of yet, she hasn't gone off the record. And so she's been talking to Shara reasonably regularly. So Shara gets the full experience of Queen Mu. Uh, whether that increases her sympathy for my perspective, I'm not sure, but it's all good. It's really great to have her collaborating with me.
That's super exciting that we have an interview with Queen Mu to look forward to. Um, so the reason I asked you to come on the show, not only to talk about the new book, I've wanted to ask you about your sense of humor and especially this idea of irreverence. So when I reviewed our last interview, we talked about irreverent humor and stuff like Saturday Night Live and The Daily Show, and you had a pretty pessimistic take. You said, look, it doesn't do anything, right? And look at the political situation we have in November 2024, right?
Yeah,
A lot of the methods of kind of like Discordian pranking and humor have been co-opted by the forces of evil, and
yeah.
pretty gloomy place. Where are you at with
I
all
mean,
that?
it could be argued that it did do something, but it did something for Donald Trump being irreverent, being not giving a fuck about the proper, elocutions and what is expected from the political mainstream in terms of your ideas and attitudes. I mean, one candidate came in with something relatively canned and something relatively cautious, and this lunatic spoke spontaneously, and people like that, you know. Uh, so, I mean, it's been problematized, as I like to say, on multiple levels. Um, what does, maybe I don't really speak for liberals particularly or neoliberalism, but in the war between neoliberalism and white nationalism, maybe the liberals should use more irreverence. I mean, the actual political people out there speaking should use more spontaneity and more irreverence. And I think honestly, their tongues are tied because they want to be cautious about not violating political correctness. And so it's very hard when you're standing up there talking and trying to find something funny to say, to have it in the back of your mind that you have to be very careful about not distressing uh, any of those groups, or not so much of groups, but points of view. So, I mean, the whole thing is massively complex on a political level. I mean, for me, I think as we discussed there in the Mondo house, reverence doesn't do anything, or that was what I was saying at the time. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop. And I think, I mean, if you're irreverent, you can't help it. And I think that's part of the spontaneity of humor, um, and where humor, even from somebody on the left, might get politically incorrect. If you can't help but being irreverent, uh, some of us can, it comes natural to some of us to only punch up. And then it comes natural to some others of us to punch over, under, upside down, as the Yardbirds sang, backwards, forward, square, and round, punching all directions. And I think it's actually sort of racist, sexist, et cetera, to hold others as sacrosanct and not be irreverent toward in every direction, within limits, but where it comes up and where it occurs to you. And I think people like that. Most people respect that kind of irreverence. I remember Krasner saying, only punch up, never punch down. But I can remember a few moments where Krasner, got naughty with various of the so-called sacrosanct groups. I mean, he definitely always made fun of the leaders of the Black Panther Party, although they were kind of powerful within that context at that time. So you could say that he was razzing some powerful players within the movement. He certainly made fun of Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, and you know, people within the movement who probably deserved for people to be irreverent towards him. I mean, I wrote on in the book about being having a thing in High Frontiers, actually, which was a result of something a girlfriend I moved to California with, Lisa, uh, did. I came home with an issue of a paper, little newspaper called Poetry Flash, and they had a picture of William S. Burroughs on it. And she cut out the picture and drew an apple on his head. Um, and we put that in High Frontiers. And then I wrote in my manuscript that it was glad that James Grauerhaus, Burroughs' personal manager, never saw it because we had a great relationship with William Burroughs as reality hackers in its Mondo 2000. But I wrote about how um, you can be irreverent. There's a certain degree of dishing it out, but not taking it within irreverent among irreverent counterculture types. And, Tim Leary didn't particularly like people being irreverent towards him all the time. I once said he was talking about something, drop names, not acid. And he was clearly not happy with that, and he was a Hollywood guy who was very concerned about who sat at his table when he went to Spagos and so forth. So anyway, I generally allow people to be as irreverent as they like towards me. I'm sure there are a few things where I could end up getting tweaked myself, but I guess it's all in the game.
So in my journey of understanding what you were doing with Mondo 2000, it took me a while to really appreciate exactly how satirical and I mean, almost beyond satire you were in sort of celebrating the counterculture and tech nonsense. Like for example, like the celebration of smart drugs and virtual reality, all this stuff. You didn't take it particularly seriously, and you were kind of putting your readers on.
Yeah, I mean, particularly St. Jude, who is hilarious. St. Jude Milhan, she had a column called Irresponsible Journalism, where she frequently wrote about smart drugs and vitamins, and the tongue was buried deep into the cheek, so that you'd really have to be observant to know that she was being ironic or sarcastic. While at the same time, maybe some of this stuff is interesting. Uh, Her enthusiastic interviews with Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw had a lot of that. I mean, she had to do that while actually seeming respectful with them on the phone, and then at the same time, sort of being respectful that they read a lot of scientific papers, and they could sort of both show off about how much scientific data both Jude and Pearson and Shaw collected about medicine, basically about medicine that was not necessarily being uh, uh, thought of as life extending or intelligence enhancing medicine, but that Pearson and Shaw, and to some extent Jude, were becoming interested in as this non prescription off label use. So I mean, we were both doing, I mean, it had a certain outlaw aspect that it was off label and non-prescription, but it was also some play, some very deep cover, refined play that it had to do with language. I mean, you couldn't just meme it back then. I mean, you could, there'd be an image, but you couldn't meme it to the degree that people can now to show that they're being ironic or sarcastic or playful about something.
So bringing up St. Jude reminds me, my first introduction to your work was through the Cyberpunk Fake book, which I understand St. Jude had a lot to do with. And this was the book that got me really excited about the possibilities of the kind of hacker mentality for, when we apply our irreverent sensibility to, look at the things that are absurd in our culture and kind of poke fun at them and then think about how we can like solve these problems. Are you still positive about the potential for the kind of hacker mentality, if not on a societal level, maybe on a personal level, to kind of like solve our problems and at least make life worth living?
I think, I mean, to the extent that this fascist administration is going to cause even further economic dislocations, and to the extent that it may be difficult, more difficult for conventional journalism with all of its faults, bringing some valid and vital news to people. And it might be up to people to work around that, to root around that, as the hacker ethics specifically says, root around authority, root around roadblocks. That kind of hacker stuff might become more vital right now. And I mean, it's funny or interesting that the hacker attitude towards mainstream media uh, was to subvert it at at first, and under the threat of fascists becomes possibly to amplify the stuff that doesn't get seen, as well as do the stuff that they won't cover in the corporate media, as well as provide uh, some way for people to get at uh, news that will no longer be available as they try to remove the licenses of the mainstream journalists, including the liberals like MSNBC and so forth. Um, it may become up, maybe up to actual, we might be talking about technical hackers again, uh, being able to provide that service. It is also the interest of from a hacker mentality to be able to force stuff that people need to see on people who need to see it, might become an activity that becomes necessary. Might take some thought and some uh, calisthenics to figure out how to do that, but that might become a thing. So yeah, hacking might become important in these times.
What are you seeing out there in social media? Is there anything that sort of excites you or that you feel is being particularly effective in sort of being like a flag that countercultural folks can rally around, or like effective methods of pranking, satire, that sort of thing?
Mm, I'm not seeing it yet. I wonder. Oh God, what's in there? I wonder if Anonymous is going to come around again. I mean, Anonymous did amazing stuff. I wrote in How to Mutate and Take Over the World that effective digital revolutionaries who would have to have a sense of irony as thick as that of David Letterman. And I thought that Anonymous did that. They like were pretty revolutionary and also had a total, deeply, deeply sort of partly hidden sense of playfulness in what they did. So maybe that will come around again, or more people will take up that style of hacking and video release. I mean, it's really interesting that Anonymous came out of 4chan before the alt-right became vital, and also came out of 4chan. And I mean, 4chan was a nasty piece of work all along, but it had its uh, left anarchist leaning adherents, and they produced Anonymous. So that's an interesting uh, evolution, devolution uh, route taken from 4chan. And there was a website that preceded 4chan that I liked. I actually nominated for a Webby back when I was participating in the Webbies, and they won, somewhat to my horror, because they really were fairly pornographic and fairly boyish in what they did. Um, so you know, I I'm at fault for everything.
So I think of you as a great countercultural historian, and I wonder like what's left for the counterculture. Is there anything left in like the psychedelic counterculture? I don't feel like we're seeing. But on the other hand, I do feel like we're seeing like resistance to the genocide in Palestine. We're seeing protests, we're seeing stuff. What is the countercultural scene in your eyes?
Yeah, I'm not sure that protests have too much of a countercultural flavor. I think maybe one of the harms to Occupy actually was that so many hippies went to Occupy demonstrations and formed drum circles, and everybody looked and said, "Oh, a bunch of fucking hippies. I'm tired of hippies. I don't want to be part of this." Um, I've thought at times that maybe the counterculture and the left were both necessary things, but not necessarily good for each other. Uh, I mean, there are those who think the whole counterculture was the CIA op to deform the left, the movement of the left in the 60s. I don't go along with that. Um, I'm not sure where to place counterculture um, in the manuscript, as well as toward the beginning and towards the end of my book, Counterculture Through the Ages. I question whether counterculture is really counter anymore. And I mean, there was also the thing of the alt-right people wanting to say we're the counterculture now. Um, and to the extent that the neoliberal mainstream culture embraced to a degree the politics of anti-racism, anti-sexism, and so forth. Uh, they they could have a claim that their desire to put out these nasty memes were counter to what the mainstream approved of. But now that they are in power, it could be that a countercultural left could have some legs, as they say. Uh, so we'll see what happens there. I mean, I think in terms of like the since the mid 1960s, psychedelia has always been identified with left or liberal leanings. And then in recent years, there's been the commercialization, the potential commercialization of psychedelics. And some of the forces that have been busy doing that have included people like Peter Thiel, have included people like Kevin O'Leary, have, uh, and even one of the Trumper Republicans, the guy with the eye patch, I can't remember his name, but he's an advocate for psychedelics. Uh, Now, once these people get into power, you have people who strongly disapprove of psychedelics, probably disapprove of the winding down of the war on drugs. Maybe they will take up the war on drugs, and that will be a pressure on Trump and his people to separate the weirdo right wing freaks from the actual Christian religious right wing nuts. And that may produce alienation among the psychedelic forces from the right wing again and push them over into uh, liberalism and or leftism. So I mean, there's a very interesting dynamic going on right now, where uh, a lot of people are in the psychedelic culture are not seeing the threat clearly yet, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of psychedelic folks are just willing to collaborate. And, you talked back in the Mondo days about how it was kind of a strange bedfellow situation. Like Barlow was a Republican. Um, uh,
Yeah, Barlow was a friend of Cheney's, actually, although once Cheney started the war against Iraq, he dropped his friendship with Cheney to his credit. Um, yeah, Leary once called me, and in a very conspiratorial voice, he said, "You know that Barlow's a Republican." Uh, I was like, "Yeah, but he's a libertarian Republican, isn't he, Tim?" And that kind of like uh, put Tim back on his heels a little bit as well. But yeah, yeah,
I mean, Robert Anton Wilson in the 50s described himself as a right-wing anarchist. I'm clutching my pearl.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So I wanted to thank you for something that you helped me with personally. We've known each other for almost 10 years now, when I started working on the history project for Mondo 2000. And at the time, I had just come out of Gamergate, right, which is something that Shira
Mm,
Chess has written about. Um,
yeah.
and I was sort of getting involved in online activism and getting interested in the kind of like reaction to the alt-right. And I was starting to become one of those kind of puritanical types. And,
Mm,
and when you mentioned, how there is this puritanical strain in the left wing or in the, the
Yeah,
kind of like democratic internet. I was
mm,
really resistant to that idea at first.
sure.
And you really helped me come around that maybe there's something kind of counterproductive about that. And watching
Yeah,
Trump in his second term, I feel like you've definitely been vindicated in that, where, we're seeing a backlash to that kind of puritanical thing where people are like, well, I voted for Trump because those left wingers called me a racist.
right, right. Yeah. Yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Persecutorial tendency, I think, and that's what they came to call cancel culture and so forth. Which can be valid, uh, but also can go way over the top sometimes. And we know people who have been pursued by cancel culture who, were are benign people, uh, people we heard about also who were benign people who had their books canceled for really bad reasons and so forth. So that's all very interesting to me. Um, and I'm happy to see you come around on some of that stuff. I mean, and one does have to be cautious about not going too far in the other direction as well. I mean, one of the things, the weird thing is watching people who uh, become embattled by cancel culture actually becoming reactionary. And I think of Ricky Gervais, and I mean, you have to have some political intelligence to fight back against people making nasty criticisms of you without becoming reactionary. I mean, David Horowitz, one of the worst right wing people, was originally an assistant to the Black Panther Party. And because of what he saw going on internally within the Black Panther Party, shifted all the way over to being one of the most extreme right wingers in the pantheon. Um, so one one has to have a background, I think, maybe partly in class politics. Uh, you have to have an understanding of class politics in order to not be pushed over into the reactionary camp.
I definitely feel like it's a class analysis that's missing from a lot of this
Yeah,
identity politics stuff.
yeah,
Um, phew. So let's talk a bit about your influences. You
yeah.
mentioned Burroughs, and how would you characterize Burroughs as a satirist and as an influence?
I mean, Burroughs, uh, his, I had his books for a while. I had, Naked Lunch, and I had Nova Express and The Ticket That Exploded. I had them all on my toilet, and I would just sit down and read them at random, which is kind of the only way to read them. I mean, they're not really linear, linear books. Uh, but I didn't get Burroughs until I heard him read. And then I realized that they're comedy routines and that he was the funniest fucking comedian of the 20th century. Um, and I mean, that's the understanding of Burroughs. I mean, uh, Roosevelt after the inauguration is just a hilarious, irreverent routine and just nasty as can be. They're very dark routines. Yeah, and I mean, that's Burroughs' influence on me was, and also, I mean, Terry Southern and Michael O'Donoghue, who both wrote for Saturday Night Live when it was still pretty hip. Uh, that you can't be too dark. Your humor can't be too black in the European sense of the term. Uh, just go all the way with it. I mean, I don't always do that anymore, but and it doesn't usually get likes when I do, but I like to.
So what's making you laugh these days?
Oh God. I mean, a lot of stuff makes me laugh. I have to think about it. Uh, I mean, I was re-listening to Fire Sign Theater before I interviewed the author of a history of Fire Sign Theater. They made me laugh repeatedly. I listened to Not Insane, their version of a political uh, gathering of the National Surrealist People's Party. I mean, just their slogans, not insane, or 6 inches off the ground so nobody gets hurt. The guaranteed annual year. Could you have a more perfect uh, response to our political situation than that? Or George Leroy Tire Biters, uh, I never lie and I'm always right. Yeah, I didn't, when I first heard Fire Sign back when I was in high school, I didn't quite get how real that is, how that's exactly what a politician has to say. I never lie and I'm always right. I mean, and now it's what a Democrat has to say. I mean, and Trump can say, yeah, oh, yeah, I lie. You know, I could shoot somebody on uh, in Manhattan and people would still vote for me. But the mainstream politician really had to say, I never lie and I'm always right. And that's such a problem, but also funny. I mean, those albums are so funny. Uh, re-listening to Bozos. I mean, nobody predicted the future better than I think we're all bozos on the bus, other than the title of the Gary Newman song, Our Friends Electric. I mean, how perfect is that?
The
But
future
yeah,
fare, a fare
yeah,
for all and no fare to
to
anybody.
anybody. Yeah,
Uh,
so good.
well, we're gonna have to take a pause here, and
Okay,
uh, I'll uh, I'll send you a Zoom link in about 10 minutes, and we'll do part two.
sure. Let's do some more.
Sounds good.